No one was ready for what Jasmine Crockett said next. Not the chairman, not the committee, not the country. The room froze the moment Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, eyes locked directly on Chairman James Comer. There was no smile, no polite preface, no political softening. She moved with the calm of someone who already knew the answer to the question she was about to ask, and that made everyone in the Oversight Committee sit up straighter. Her voice dropped into a slow, controlled tone that demanded attention. Chairman Comer, where are the missing Jeffrey Epstein documents? The effect was instant. Members shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at one another. Staffers, who had been shuffling papers and typing away seconds earlier, stopped mid-keystroke. A few even looked up as though they had misheard her. And then, as if on cue, the camera zoomed in, tightening their focus on the two figures at the center of this sudden storm. For months, rumors had circulated around Washington about unreleased Epstein files. Documents that were supposed to be part of a transparency push, but somehow kept slipping through the cracks. Some said they were delayed. Others claimed they were misplaced. A few whispered that they were being held back intentionally. But no one had asked the question directly. No one had dared to pull it into the light. Until Jasmine Crockett. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She simply let the silence after her question hang in the air like a tension-filled cord. And that silence did more damage than a shouted accusation ever could. That silence is what cracked the moment open. Across the table, Chairman Comer froze. His hands, resting on a stack of papers, tightened slightly. His eyes flickered up toward Crockett, then down toward the microphone, and then back again. It was a tiny movement, almost invisible, but for a man known for quick, confident comebacks, that pause was telling. The entire room felt it. He didn't have an answer ready. Crockett tilted her head just slightly, as though inviting him to speak. But instead of responding, Comer shuffled his papers, buying himself a second or two. It wasn't enough. Crockett continued, her tone steady and almost disarmingly calm. We requested those documents months ago. Your office acknowledged they existed. Yet somehow they never arrived. They weren't logged. They weren't released. Not a single page. The words cut through the room. Behind Comer, one of his aides lowered her head. Another leaned forward, as if anticipating an explosion. Lawmakers on the other side exchanged quick whispers, unsure whether to jump in or stay out of the line of fire. But Crockett wasn't finished. She straightened her papers, not because she needed them, but because the gesture made it clear she was in full control. Chairman Comer, the public has questions about Epstein, many questions. And whether people agree on politics or not, they agree on one thing. They want answers. So let me ask again, where are the files? Comer finally spoke, though his voice didn't carry its usual force. He began with the typical procedural explanation, talking about classification levels, review processes, and interdepartment communications. But Crockett didn't blink. She didn't even move. She let him talk. And the longer he talked, the more the room could hear the weakness in his answer. When he finished, she responded instantly. With respect, Chairman, that's not what I asked. I didn't ask why they weren't released. I asked where they are. A low murmur swept the room. Some members leaned back in their chairs. Others leaned forward. Everyone knew what was happening now. This wasn't a simple oversight question. This was a moment, the kind that gets replayed on every platform, clept and reposted, dissected by analysts, and watched by millions. Comer looked irritated. He tried to pivot, shifting the conversation toward procedural obligations and ongoing investigations. But Crockett didn't blink. She didn't even move. She let him talk.
And the longer he talked, the more the room could hear the weakness in his answer. When he finished, she responded instantly. "With respect, Chairman, that's not what I asked. I didn't ask why they weren't released. I asked where they are." A low murmur swept the room. Some members leaned back in their chairs, others leaned forward. Everyone knew what was happening now. This wasn't a simple oversight question. This was a moment, the kind that gets replayed on every platform, clipped and reposted, dissected by analysts, and watched by millions. Comer looked irritated. He tried to pivot, shifting the conversation toward procedural obligations and ongoing investigations. But Crockett interrupted him with the sharp precision of someone who refused to let the door close. "Chairman, please. We both know these kinds of documents have tracking logs. They don't vanish. They don't wander off. They don't magically disappear for 8 months." Another camera zoomed in. She continued. Someone had them. Someone reviewed them. Someone made a decision. There it was, the line that hit the room like a tremor. Comer stiffened, his jaw clenched. He tried to cut her off, but she raised a finger, just enough to assert her time. "I'm not implying anything improper," she said, voice soft but unshakable. "I'm stating a fact. Epstein had ties to powerful people, and the public deserves the truth." A few members shifted uncomfortably, aware of the implications. Crockett leaned in one more time. "So, Mr. Chairman, will you commit today, on the record, to producing every Epstein document this committee requested? Not next month, not when available. Now." Comer adjusted his papers again. He tried to speak. He stumbled. The reaction spoke louder than words. For the first time, the power dynamic wasn't in his favor. And everyone knew it. Crockett closed her folder calmly, the way someone does when they already made their point. "The American people won't accept excuses. Neither will I." The room didn't just freeze this time, it held its breath. Because after years of silence, secrecy, and speculation, one truth became clear. This question wasn't going away. Not now. Not after this moment. Not after Jasmine Crockett forced it into the spotlight in front of the entire nation. Before Chairman James Comer could even gather his words, Jasmine Crockett continued speaking, not aggressively, not emotionally, but with a level of surgical precision that instantly shifted the power in the room. She didn't shout, she didn't attack, she simply laid out facts one after another like an attorney building a case in front of a jury. And in that moment, the entire committee realized that Crockett hadn't walked in with just questions. She walked in with receipts. She began calmly outlining a timeline that left no room for misunderstanding. It was the kind of timeline that could only come from someone who had been paying close attention, someone who had studied the shifting explanations and the missing answers like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She reminded the committee and the cameras how requests for Epstein-related documents were made months earlier. Not once, not twice, multiple requests, formally documented, acknowledged, and timestamped. The responses they received were vague, incomplete, or simply never delivered. Some arrived missing pages, some arrived with irrelevant attachments, some never arrived at all. Certain files were said to be in transit, yet mysteriously never showed up, a phrase that had become a convenient excuse anytime a sensitive document seemed to disappear into administrative fog. And every single delay aligned suspiciously with rising public pressure surrounding the Epstein network. Every time the public demanded answers, the paperwork seemed to move slower. As she listed each detail, Crockett shifted her eyes back toward Chairman Comer. Her voice didn't change, but the energy in the room did. The tension thickened, the murmurs grew louder, and everyone watching, in the room and at home, could feel something major unfolding. Then she delivered the line that cut through the silence like a blade. "Chairman, these documents didn't lose themselves." The words echoed, sharp and unmistakable. She continued, "Someone misplaced them, someone withheld them, or someone doesn't want the American people to see what's inside." A wave of murmurs swept across the hearing room. Staffers looked at each other. Committee members shifted uneasily. Even the reporters glanced up from their laptops, suddenly aware that they were witnessing something that would dominate headlines. Comer stiffened. His jaw tightened. His expression hardened just slightly, the kind of reaction that speaks louder than words. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. In fact, she was just getting started. She reached into her folder with slow, deliberate movement, the kind that signals confidence, not desperation. When she spoke again, her tone was steady, almost clinical. She explained that she had been reviewing the inconsistencies surrounding the missing Epstein documents for weeks. She had read the correspondence, noted the patterns, compared dates, analyzed contradictions, and matched them against public statements. She hadn't stumbled onto this moment. She built it. Then she leaned in, not aggressively, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew the weight of the question she was about to ask. "Chairman Comer," she said, her voice lowering, "did you personally review these documents, or were they never in your possession to begin with?" The silence was instant and brutal. It wasn't the ordinary kind of silence that fills a room after a difficult question. It was heavier, thicker, more dangerous. It was the silence of a man who suddenly found himself without a rehearsed answer. It was the silence of a committee realizing they were no longer dealing with speculation. They were dealing with accountability. For several long seconds, Comer didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't look at his staff or shuffle his papers. He just sat there. And Crockett held the silence like a weapon. The camera zoomed in. Members watched her. Reporters typed frantically. This wasn't a debate anymore. This wasn't a policy disagreement. This wasn't partisan theater. This was a cross-examination. Crockett, still composed, continued to stare at Comer with the controlled intensity of someone who had followed every breadcrumb and now stood at the end of the trail. She didn't need to raise her voice because the silence itself became her loudest argument. Some members attempted to interject, only to be drowned out by the weight of the moment. Others leaned back, almost retreating from the battlefield forming in front of them. A few, clearly uncomfortable, avoided eye contact altogether. Crockett finally broke the silence, but only by a fraction. "Chairman, the committee and the American people deserve a clear answer." Still nothing. Not because Comer didn't want to speak, but because any answer he gave would have consequences. If he admitted the documents were never in his possession, it would imply negligence or worse. If he admitted he had reviewed them, then the question became why they weren't released. If he deflected, it confirmed suspicion. If he stayed quiet, it confirmed fear. It was a no-win situation, and Crockett had put him there without raising a single decibel. She sat back slowly, giving him space to answer. But everyone knew the moment had already landed. The damage was done, the point was made, and the room knew it. Because for the first time in months, someone had dared to confront the silence surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's missing documents, and she did it in a way that forced the entire country to pay attention.
James Comer tried to recover. He cleared his throat, straightened the papers in front of him, and attempted to build the kind of slow, carefully manufactured response politicians rely on when they're caught off guard. He shifted in his seat, adjusted his microphone, and began to speak in measured, heavy phrases, the kind that circled the question without ever touching it. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't having it. The moment he began drifting into excuses, she cut through the fog like a blade. Comer's first attempt was the oldest trick in the book, blaming the staff. He raised his hand slightly, palms open, and said something about internal communication breakdowns and how certain materials may have been delayed by clerical errors. Crockett immediately leaned in. Her voice didn't rise.
It didn't crack. It stayed calm and sharp. Your staff only moves on orders. Let's not blame people who can't defend themselves. The room reacted instantly. A few members glanced toward Comer, wondering how he'd respond. Others leaned forward, anticipating the strike. Staffers behind him froze, knowing they had just been shielded from taking the fall. Comer blinked, visibly irritated. He shuffled his papers again, a nervous gesture, then pivoted to his next excuse. He insisted the documents were classified, using the phrase as if it provided automatic cover. He listed the typical bureaucratic language: national security review, sensitivity, protocol, and ongoing assessment. Crockett didn't flinch. She replied smoothly, "Classified materials still require tracking logs. Where are those logs?" Another ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Her point was airtight. Every document, especially classified ones, leaves a paper trail, time-stamped, logged, auditable. The fact that Comer could not produce those logs said volumes. He tried to move on quickly, but Crockett wasn't finished. His third excuse was that the documents were being reviewed for release. He said it with confidence, as if the phrase would close the matter and put an end to the questioning. Crockett leaned forward, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. Her voice dropped even lower. "For 8 months? Chairman, nobody believes that." Her tone alone was enough to ignite the room. Comer's face reddened, not just from pressure, but from frustration. The veneer of control he had tried to maintain began to crack. His reply grew sharper, louder. He accused Crockett of politicizing a sensitive matter, of grandstanding, of misrepresenting the situation. But Crockett remained unmoved. The louder he became, the quieter she spoke. It was a tactic she had used before, one that instantly flipped the power dynamic. While Comer's voice rose with stress, hers stayed level, crisp, cutting, unshakable. Her calmness made his defensiveness look like guilt. Her restraint made his agitation look like panic. The contrast was devastating. For every sentence Comer tried to deliver, Crockett countered with something shorter, stronger, more precise. She didn't talk over him. She simply waited, then struck when his words fell apart. Then, in a moment that felt almost cinematic, she delivered the line that broke the entire exchange open, a line that would explode across social media within minutes. "Chairman Comer, the American people watched Epstein's story disappear once. They will not watch it disappear again. Not on your watch, not on mine." The room reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, a few audible "oh wow" reactions from the audience. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. Every reporter in the room lifted their head. Every phone recording flickered to life. It was the kind of moment that didn't need commentary. The words spoke for themselves. Comer froze. The weight of that sentence hit him harder than any direct accusation could have. Crockett didn't say he hid the documents. She didn't claim he obstructed anything. She simply drew a line between the past disappearance of truths and the present disappearance of documents, and left him standing in the middle. It was strategic. It was powerful. It was devastating. Comer tried to move on, but what came out wasn't a polished rebuttal. It was frustration. His voice cracked at the edges. He stumbled over a phrase. He looked toward his staff for help that wasn't coming. In that moment, it became painfully clear. He had no script, no shield, no fallback strategy. He had been cornered, publicly, visibly, and in real time. Crockett sat back slightly, watching him struggle, her expression calm, almost expressionless. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply waited. Because she knew, and everyone in that committee room knew, that the exchange was already over. The moment she delivered that line, the narrative shifted. The power shifted. The entire country's attention shifted. And for the first time since the hearing began, James Comer had no place to hide. He wasn't dealing with a political opponent. He wasn't dealing with a loud critic. He was dealing with a prosecutor in the body of a congresswoman, and she had just made her case in front of the nation.
Crockett wasn't just exposing contradictions, she had come armed with physical evidence. And she revealed it with the kind of deliberate, theatrical precision that only someone completely confident in their facts can pull off. In front of the entire committee, she lifted a thick folder into view. She didn't rush, she didn't flip it open aggressively. Instead, she opened it slowly, letting the tension in the room build. Every eye in the chamber focused on the folder. Every camera lens zoomed in. Every whisper faded into silence. This was the moment everyone realized. She hadn't walked in to ask questions. She had walked in to prove answers. Inside the folder were documents that immediately changed the tone of the hearing. Email exchanges, dozens of them, dated, time-stamped, acknowledging receipt of the Epstein files and confirming they were logged into the internal system. Internal memos, short but revealing, referencing the documents, discussing follow-ups, and asking for updates about their release status. Time-stamped request receipts, hard proof showing exactly when the committee requested the Epstein materials, when they were acknowledged, and when follow-up reminders were sent. And most damning of all, a tracking sheet. One line on that sheet sent a shockwave through the room. The Epstein documents were logged as received, but never logged as released. For a moment, the entire chamber froze. That meant one thing, and only one thing. They existed. They were in the building, and someone stopped them from reaching the committee. A hush fell over the room like a heavy blanket. James Comer's eyes widened slightly, the kind of reaction he couldn't hide even if he tried. He began shifting uncomfortably, flipping through his own papers as if hoping they might magically contain a rebuttal. But Crockett wasn't slowing down. As she held up the tracking sheet for everyone to see, Comer attempted to interrupt. He leaned forward and tried to raise his voice, saying something about context and procedures. But before he could continue, Crockett raised her hand sharply. "Chairman, I am speaking." Her voice didn't just echo, it cut through the air like a hammer striking steel. The room went silent again. Crockett continued, steady and controlled. She explained how the document trail she uncovered showed clear interference. Not by staff members struggling with paperwork, not by overwhelmed clerks or miscommunication, but by decision-makers at the highest level of the committee. Her voice grew firmer as she laid out each point. The emails referenced the documents. The memos confirm follow-up. The tracking sheet proves they arrived. But somehow, the release stopped at the top. A ripple of gasps spread across the room. Comer's face tightened. He slammed his gavel once, trying to regain control. "Order!" he barked. But no amount of shouting could put the truth back in the folder. Crockett held the papers up again, making sure every camera captured every word. Then she delivered the question that would become the headline on every news channel, every social feed, every trending topic for the next 48 hours. "Chairman Comer, who is protecting the Epstein network?" The room instantly exploded. Members on both sides shouted for order. Staffers scrambled. Cameras flashed like a storm. Multiple people attempted to speak at once. Comer slammed the gavel again and again, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. But Crockett didn't stop. She raised her voice just enough to slice through the chaos. "I'm not accusing anyone," she said. "I'm not speculating. I am following the trail of evidence, and that trail leads straight to the chairman's desk." Her statement hit like a lightning bolt. Crockett wasn't pointing fingers recklessly.
She wasn't making wild claims. She was laying out facts, facts that came from the committee's own documents, not rumors or theories. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in. CNN, Fox, MSNBC all captured the moment. Clips were already being clipped, screenshotted, and uploaded in real time. Comer pounded the gavel again. His voice echoed, strained and panicked. "You are out of order!" But it didn't matter. For millions watching or about to watch, the visual was unmistakable. A chairman shouting for order. A congresswoman holding the truth in her hands. Documents that clearly showed something had gone wrong, very wrong, inside the committee. Crockett turned her gaze back to Comer one final time. Her voice softened, which somehow made the moment even more powerful. The American people deserve to know who stopped these documents and why. The entire room froze again. Even Comer didn't speak this time. Because Crockett wasn't just questioning him anymore. She had cornered him with evidence, timelines, and facts, the kind of evidence no gavel could silence. In that moment, everyone watching realized. This wasn't political theater. This wasn't a shouting match. This wasn't partisan noise. This was a direct challenge to secrecy backed by proof. And Jasmine Crockett had just turned the entire hearing upside down.
The moment the exchange hit the airwaves, everything changed. As the oversight hearing spiraled into chaos, newsrooms across the country stopped what they were doing. Producers leaned over desks. Editors shouted for transcripts. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett confronting Chairman James Comer was firing across social media faster than anyone inside that room could have imagined. Hashtags exploded. Epstein files, where are the documents, Crockett versus Comer. Millions of people clicked, tens of thousands commented. Commentators jumped onto emergency live streams just to break down the confrontation frame by frame. Political analysts, journalists, influencers, everyone had an opinion, but one thing was undeniable. Crockett's question reopened a scandal the political world had quietly hoped was buried. For years, the Epstein case had floated like a dark cloud over Washington, a cloud filled with rumors, sealed files, and powerful names that no one wanted aired in public. Investigators released only fragments. Agencies refused to comment. Witness lists were whispered about but never confirmed. The public had questions, and the government had given nothing but shadows. But on this day, inside that hearing room, Jasmine Crockett ripped the issue back into daylight with 12 simple words. "Chairman Comer, where are the missing Jeffrey Epstein documents?" The room froze. And so did the country. Comer's unraveling began instantly. Every attempt he made to regain control only poured gasoline on the moment. His first move was to deflect, the same strategy he'd used in heated hearings before. But this time, it didn't work. Crockett didn't interrupt him. She didn't argue. She simply waited, staring directly at him, letting every second of his hesitation expose him more clearly than any speech ever could. The cameras captured every micro-expression, the tightening of his jaw, the shuffle of his papers, the slight tremble of frustration he couldn't hide. He tried to brush it off, but his tone cracked. He tried to change the subject, but Crockett brought him right back. He tried to accuse her of grandstanding, but she responded with calm, surgical precision. It became the spectacle he never wanted. His anger became part of the story. His evasions became part of the evidence. And his silence, that long, uncomfortable silence, became a powerful suspicion that echoed online for hours. By the time Crockett leaned back into her microphone to deliver her final remarks, the hearing wasn't about procedure anymore. It wasn't about partisanship or political point scoring. It was about one question, a question that millions were already demanding answers to. Where are the missing Epstein documents?
Crockett's final blow was delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the world was watching. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize her words. She simply spoke with the kind of certainty that sends chills through a room. Mr. Chairman, transparency is not optional. And if these documents do not appear, you will answer for it. Her words struck like a gavel. Staffers exchanged looks. Members shifted in their chairs. Comer stared down at his notes, knowing the clip was already beyond his control. And then, in a moment that would replay endlessly on news channels and social platforms, Crockett packed her notes neatly, closed her folder, and stood. As she pushed her chair back, the entire room leaned into the silence. Before she walked away, she turned back toward the microphone, not to argue, not to gloat, but to deliver the sentence that would define the day. The truth always surfaces, even when people try to bury it. A single moment, a single sentence, and the entire hearing felt like it cracked open. The cameras captured everything. They captured the moment she cornered him, the moment he stumbled, the moment he realized he was not just facing a member of Congress, he was facing a national audience demanding answers. And beyond the politics, beyond the theatrics, beyond the pressure in that room, one thing became unmistakably clear. The Epstein question had been revived. And this time, it wasn't slipping quietly back into the shadows. Within hours, congressional offices were flooded with calls. News networks began running special segments. Theories resurfaced. New demands for transparency were sent to federal agencies. Even lawmakers who had once avoided the issue now found themselves cornered by reporters asking what Crockett asked so publicly: where are the missing Jeffrey Epstein documents? That question didn't disappear overnight. It didn't fade by morning. It didn't get lost in the next news cycle. Because Jasmine Crockett, with one unexpected, fearless moment, made sure the question would not be buried again. And now, because of her, the country is once again demanding the truth. And this time, people are watching closer than ever.